Hello everyone, here's a new educational chess game. I have the white pieces and I start with the pawn to e4. I'm playing against an opponent rated 1693. He replies with c6, the Caro-Kann defense. It's my favorite defense. Usually when I have black, I'm the one playing this move. c6, well, I'll play the pawn to d4. I establish this strong pawn center, and normally when you play c6 with black, it's to push d5. And that's exactly what my opponent does. So, against the Caro-Kann defense, I'm more used to playing the exchange variation, which doesn't lead to a symmetrical position. It's not an exchange variation that dulls the position, like in the French defense, for example. The exchange variation in the French defense dries out the position because it creates a similar structure. Whereas here, that's not the case. It doesn't lead to a similar pawn structure, because when black recaptures, there will be the semi-open e file against the semi-open c file. But my opponent played queen to a5. I'm just going to play simply pawn to c3. He can recapture with the queen, but again it won't be a symmetrical pawn structure. I'll have the semi-open e file against the semi-open d file. And if he recaptures with the pawn, it'll be the semi-open e file against the semi-open c file. So each time it creates pawn structures with imbalances, and thanks to these imbalances we can build plans. He recaptured with the queen, so I have a space advantage on the semi-open e file. This often allows for a kingside attack when my opponent castles short. He's not obliged to castle short. He can castle long, but the advance of the c-pawn will weaken the protection on the queenside castle. And why will I have attacking opportunities if he castles short? Well, quite simply because the space advantage on the e-file will allow my pieces to move toward, to approach his king, or to target his castle position. But for now, the presence of the queen is bothering me, because usually I would play bishop to d3 in this type of position. But here, I would lose the g2 pawn, so I can't do that. And if I play an f3, he'll take the opportunity to develop his bishop before playing e6. And developing his bishop will help better secure his kingside. So I'm considering h3, but in any case, he can still develop his bishop via f5. So whatever happens, his bishop will be able to come out. So I'll play an f3. And if he plays, bg4, f2. I couldn't prevent his bishop from coming out to f5 or g4. He plays an f6. Here it's the same. His bishop could come out to f5 or g4 and then play the e6 push. I can't stop both of these moves, so I'll just continue developing. After bishop d3, he'll probably pin me with his bishop, bg4. But that's not a problem. There will be moves like nd2. I'm going to play bishop d3. He plays g6. He still keeps the option to play f5 or f4. And he wants to put his bishop on g7 before castling short. Well, as for me, I'll castle short. Normally, in this type of pawn structure, my plan is to play on the e-file. For example, putting a rook on e1 to put pressure on the pawn on e7, but most likely that pawn will eventually move to e6. And then set up a knight on e5, which is called placing the knight on the outpost. But now he plays bishop g4, so he's pinning my knight. And his threat is even to take the knight, because if I recapture with the queen, he takes back, and in any case, I'll be forced to recapture with the pawn, which will ruin the pawn structure. So I'm going to play knight to d2. If he takes now, I can recapture with the knight. And I'm even going to try to play h3, because he won't be able to retreat to h5 because of the g4 push. So after h3, maybe he'll exchange and give me the pair of bishops. I'll start with rook to e1 to put pressure on e7 and prevent kingside castling. So he's going to play e6. And after h3, bishop takes knight. Knight recaptures. And I can try to play for the e5 outpost with my knight. But he'll certainly play knight to d7 to contest control of the e5 square. If he plays queen to d6. Why does he play that? Queen to d6? What's his idea? He wants to protect. e7 actually. So he can castle kingside. I'm looking at attacking moves, knight to c4 for example. But they can come to d7. I can play knight to e5 attacking his queen and his bishop. I think I'm going to play knight to c4. I'd actually like him to come to d7, because that would take the square away from his b8 knight and hinder his development. After knight to c4, queen to d7, knight to e5, he'll definitely play bishop takes, knight takes, but it's better than playing h3, bishop takes, knight takes, because the queen on d6 leaves the d7 square for the knight. So I'm going to play knight to c4. He plays to c7 to give the knight access to d7, but on the other hand, the queen will no longer defend the e7 pawn if the knight comes to d7. And so if he castles short, it will be taken. I'm going to play h3 because if bishop takes, then queen takes, and my queen will be able to support the bishop coming to f4. And if the queen moves, maybe knight d6 check because the pawn on e7 is pinned. h3, if bishop f5, we can take and break up the pawn structure a bit. If bishop e6, I'm even considering rook takes e6. Pawn takes, I sacrifice the exchange, but to destroy his pawn structure and compromise his king's shelter. You see, bishop e6, rook takes, pawn takes. And already, after that, we can play some moves, like knight g5, which threatens. Knight takes e6, attacking the queen and the bishop with a nice fork. Yes, on bishop e6, it's almost automatic. The move, rook takes e6. You see, on bishop h5, he gets crushed by g4. On bishop f5, certainly taking to double his pawns and compromise his castling shelter. On bishop e6, we sacrifice the exchange. On bishop d7, the knight can't get out. Maybe it can go back to c8, but then his development isn't optimal. This game is very interesting so far. He plays bishop to e6, there you go. This is going to be great, we'll be able to make this exchange sacrifice. And you see, it's intuitive. I didn't even really calculate it. I just see that I break his pawn structure, doubled pawns, isolated pawns, a semi-open e-file to attack, the weak e5 square for my knights, and his king is exposed. And on top of that, I take away his light-squared bishop, and on the light squares he has weaknesses. If, for example, at some point I play knight to e5, I can put the bishop on c4 to attack e6. But even if he castles short, his kingside is held together by the h7 pawn, which defends h6. But sometimes you can try to destroy that pawn. Well, here, the knight could take, but you'd have to see in other situations. So here I'm hesitating between several moves. Queen to e2 to attack e6. Knight to g5 to attack e6. You see, with moves like knight to g5. Sometimes you can even threaten. Knight takes h7. For example, if he recaptures with the rook, bishop takes g6 with a fork. Or if he recaptures with the knight, bishop takes g6 with check. That's still interesting. But I shouldn't get too carried away. I've already sacrificed the exchange, so I need to be careful. With knight to g5, the pressure on e6, how is he going to defend? On qd7, maybe qe5 to attack his queen again. With the double control, by the way, of the f7 square for a possible infiltration of my knights, that could be interesting. And on qg5, qd7, there could also be qe2 to attack e6 again. And on qg5, what I like is that I'm never afraid of h6. Because that would weaken the light squares, and since he doesn't have a light squared bishop, I could take on g6 with check. So qg5. For those who know, it's the same idea as the knight attack. If you haven't seen my latest instructional game on the theme of the knight attack, I invite you to click on the link above. Except that in the knight attack, you sacrifice a pawn to weaken your opponent's pawn structure, whereas here, I sacrifice the exchange. He plays knight to d7, but then knight takes e6, a fork, and he completely collapses. So I take on e6, the fork. It's still interesting because after queen to c8, if I play knight to g7 check, king to f7, my knight can't get out. But after knight takes g7, king to f7, I can play bishop to h6 to defend it, but he'll play knight to g8 to attack my bishop. There must be something here. I'll take my time, I'll think about it. It's worth taking the time to find the best move in this position. Well, I don't see it. I'll take on g7 with check. I didn't see anything better than that. We'll look at the analysis. After each instructional game, I offer an analysis to try to see the moves I missed and how I could have improved my play. King to f7 has been played. So here, either I defend with bishop to h6, knight to g8, and maybe queen to d2, or I go back to e6 to force his king out, try to find an attack against his king, but I didn't find one. I could also go out to f5, he'll take my knight, but bishop takes and I win back a pawn. That might actually be the best thing to do. He'll have an extra rook, but I'll have the pair of bishops, more pawns, and his king's shelter is weak. Let's play it this way, knight to f5. And also, after pawn takes, bishop takes, there's this pin. Well, it's true, he can play e6, but then there will be knight to d6 with a fork on the king and queen, so he won't even be able to play e6. Now, if he doesn't take back, I'll be up a piece. Actually, I'll even have two bishops and an extra pawn against just a rook. So he's forced to recapture. Bishop takes, I'm threatening. Knight to e5 check. Because after knight to e5 check, the knight can't take, it's pinned. And the idea is maybe to take his knight to force this knight to retreat and allow the queen to access the kingside. With the help of the bishop and the knight, we'll definitely find some mating combinations. But now he just played b5. So knight to e5. In the end, he's pushing me to make the right move. You see, bishop takes knight, knight recaptures, queen to h5, check, whether he goes to g7, f8 or g8, every time. The queen enters on f7, and that's going to lead to mate. With the knight protecting the queen, of course. Even if he goes to g7, by the way. Bishop takes, knight takes, queen to h5, check, king to g7, queen to f7, mate. Because the king can't escape to h6 because of the bishop. So he goes to e8. So bishop takes, knight takes, queen to h5, check, he can go to d8, and I have the fork on f7. Alright, well, let's do that. It's a shame, I wanted to keep my knight on e5. But if I win the rook, I'll simply have a rook up, a pawn up, and his king has no shelter. There we go, I take his rook. We can give a little check with bishop to f4 to speed up development and bring the rook into play. My king is well secured, the bishop can come back. The rook moves to the file and attacks the pawn on e7. But here I have queen to e5 with possible entries on c7. I can do that. Rook takes e7, also an intermediate check. Why not actually? Let's give a check. If he goes to b6, we have queen to c5 check. On king b6 we can also have bishop. c7 check. Way too many threats against him. So maybe king to a6. Maybe queen to c5. That way his rook can't move because of the mate threats on a7. And with queen to c5, I'm attacking the c6 pawn. I'm threatening queen takes c6, check, king to a5, b4 check, king to a4, and queen to a6 mate. He plays queen to c8. He's coming to protect c6. But I have rook to c7. I'm attacking his queen, protected by my bishop. And I'm attacking the c6 pawn twice. Queen to e8. So rook takes c6 check, that seems obvious. If king to a5, we have queen to b4 mate immediately. So king to b7, no, he plays king to a5 and it's mate. So the computer gives me 96% accuracy versus 87% for my opponent. But let's take a look, because the exchange sacrifice to destroy his pawn structure is very interesting. We'll see what he could have done to avoid this, and how he could have managed the situation better. When I sacrificed the exchange. So I played pawn to e4, he plays c6, the Caro-Kann defense. I play d4, he comes to attack my center, I take on d5. Usually black recaptures with the pawn, but he throws in queen to a5 check first. That's interesting. I play c3, queen takes d5. And here, usually I like to counter the development of the bishop. I like it when black plays e6 before developing the bishop so that it's trapped. But here, I can't do that. He's going to be able to bring the bishop to f5 anyway, and I can't prevent that. So I play knight to f3. He plays knight to f6. I develop my bishop to d3. He plays pawn to g6. I castle kingside. He develops his bishop to g4. I play knight to d2. He plays bishop to g7. The rook on the file. And now he plays queen to d6 to defend e7 and allow kingside castling. But I play knight to c4. I want the queen to come to d7 to take the knight square on b8, to slightly hinder the completion of his queenside development, and to give my pieces a bit more scope. He plays queen to c7. So he leaves the d7 square for the knight, but as a result the queen will no longer protect e7 if he castles kingside. I explained this during the game. And I play h3. And now for his bishop, it's not easy to make the right decision. By the way, the computer gives me an advantage of almost 1 point. Because I have a space advantage, a pawn structure that gives me more space, and I have better development. And on top of that, he'll either have to give me the bishop pair, which is what the computer recommends. After bishop.f3, queen.f3, I have better development, the bishop pair, and more space. Or he has to retreat the bishop, but if it goes to h5, I've pushed g4. If it goes to f5, we can destroy the pawn structure with bishop takes f5. If it goes to e6, that's what will happen in the game. If it goes to d7, the knight can't come out via d7. And if it goes to c8, he leaves me with a huge development advantage because it's still my move. I can develop my bishop or use the e5 square with my knights. I have a lot of options. But he goes to e6. He doesn't expect the exchange sacrifice. But I do it. Rook takes e6, pawn takes e6, and as you can see, the computer now gives me a big advantage. It's like a knight attack where, usually, you have a pawn on e5, you push to e6, you give up a pawn so that black recaptures and weakens their pawn structure. Except that here, I didn't have a pawn to give. But I sacrificed the exchange. In other words, I traded the rook for the bishop. But I know that e6 is weak and the king is vulnerable, and in fact I play knight to g5 to attack e6. In the game he played knight to d7, so immediately knight to e6, a fork. What could he have done? If he tries to defend the e6 pawn with king f7, that's not possible because of the knight. If he pushes e5, I'll still have the knight coming into e6, and on top of that, I can win a pawn. He could play queen to d7 to defend, but then there's knight to e5 with threats of entering on f7 as well, so maybe queen to c8 to avoid having his queen attacked and still keep protecting. But here I can simply play queen to e2. Attacked twice, he can't defend. So let's see, for example, if he castles. I take on e6, attacking his rook, say rook to f7. Here I think I would have taken his dark squared bishop, which is an important defender. And in this position, it's true that I'm down the exchange, but the rooks aren't active. I have a powerful pair of bishops, both directly aimed at his king. And his king lacks shelter. The f7 pawn is missing, and I have the knight on e5 that can come in. By the way, in this position I play it, knight to e5 for example, rook to f8 if he wants to keep the exchange advantage. And you see, the fact that I took it, his dark squared bishop being gone now allows my pair of bishops to penetrate on the dark squares. For example, knight to d7. To try to develop, but queen to h6, check. He can't go to f7, he might have to go to g8. And here already I can sacrifice. I have the queen, the knight, the pair of bishops. This is typical. There are too many pieces for him to be able to defend. His king, especially since his queen and rook can't come back to defend. So, for example, knight takes g6, then we take queen takes g6, check, king to h8. He can't go to h7 because his knight is there. If I go to h6, it's interesting. He can't play knight to h6 because I would take with mate since the bishop is there. So, but after queen to h6, he could go back to g8. So I need to get there with my bishop, but bishop c4. Maybe bishop to c4. He might try to play knight to d5 to block, but his king will be very exposed. Or bishop to f5 with the idea of pinning his knight and simply playing bishop to e6. For example, queen to e8 could trade queens, but queen to h6, check, king to g8, bishop to e6, check. If he doesn't want to lose the queen, he has to block with the rook, and queen to g6, check. If he goes to h8, we win the rook. If he goes to f8, bishop to h6, check. You see, even after sacrificing, there are just too many pieces coming in. Rook to g7, you can play queen takes rook mate, but the best is to take with the bishop and deliver mate. So of course you don't have to see everything in advance. In fact, I hadn't seen everything myself. I hadn't seen this sequence, but you have to feel it. You have to understand that after queen to c8, queen to d2, the e6 pawn will fall. Short castle, knight takes e6, and then we can take the dark squared bishop. Without his dark squared bishop, we'll have the pair of bishops, and with queen to e3, we can infiltrate on the dark squares. The knight will come in, there's the other bishop. Certainly we can sacrifice. We can push the h-pawn to try to dismantle what's left of the black king's shelter. There are too many attacks because all the pieces are joining the attack. This knight is attacking, the other one will come in, the pair of bishops as well, the queen can join, and the pawn might also attack. It's clear that black doesn't have the means to defend. So in this position he played knight to d7, I took on e6, and he played queen to c8, I take on g7 with check, he plays king to f7, and now my knight can't get out. The computer says you can defend with f6, but knight to g8 was bothering me. So I preferred to get out to f5, accept losing the piece, but anyway, I'm already up a piece, and I get to win another pawn. And in this position, we have the same number of pieces. He has the exchange, but I have 2 extra pawns. Important pawns because they're the ones missing from the king's shelter. He has worse development and a weaker king's shelter. And on top of that, I have the pair of bishops, so he plays b5. Knight to e5, check. King to e8. Here I give up the pair of bishops to be able to infiltrate with my queen, to fork on f7. Here I win back the exchange. So now, I'm not even down the exchange anymore, I simply have 2 extra pawns. And the attack continues. Bishop f4, check, king b7. There's no cohesion in his play. Rook e1, his pieces are scattered. Knight f6, rook takes e7. Check, he came to a6. Now, it's pretty easy to win. Queen c5, queen c8, rook c7, he plays queen e8, rook takes c6, check, king a5. And there we can. Checkmate with queen b4 as I did, or checkmate with queen a3. However, b4 isn't checkmate right away because he's on the a4 square. But you can checkmate just after. There you go, I hope this game was instructive. So, it wasn't planned, but it's a game that still fits the theme of a knight attack. Except that I didn't sacrifice a pawn to destroy his pawn structure near his king, but I sacrificed the exchange. It's really the same kind of idea. A small sacrifice to create major structural damage and insecurity around his king. I hope the video was instructive. You can leave me likes, comments, share the video, and of course, support the channel. See you soon. Goodbye, everyone.